Snow. It's snowing again. I hate talking about the weather, but everything is covered in snow. What else is there to talk about? I haven't seen a green leaf in months. It's all gray and white, mostly white. Just like my blank pages, everything is covered in white. I could paint the white off the pages, scribble some ink, or use colors I once knew. But the outside would remain awfully white, blank, and frozen in time, just like my mind. Welcome to the Memento Mori Lab podcast. I'm Myra, your host and aspiring creative friend. Well, I live in Canada and my house is covered in snow. So, yeah, that's part of the inspiration for this episode. I guess all the white snow, the white sky, and the white pages got to me in a way. But this episode is not about Canada's weather. Even though people here seem to love talking about it, there seems to exist a silent competition to see who knows more about the forecast, especially regarding how many centimeters of snow we're going to get. But anyway, this episode is not about the weather. This episode is about facing blank pages and feeling completely frozen. I feel like this on most days, and I quickly pick up my phone to distract myself from my absolute failure, which obviously doesn't end up well, and which truly is not a failure at all. Why is it that whenever there's a creative thing we really want to do, we feel completely paralyzed, unable to inch forward while our minds work overtime? Or is it just me? As I overthink every step I have to take on my creative journey and imagine every possible outcome, this cold, freezing fear slowly spreads through my body until I can no longer move. Instead of worrying about the one simple action I could take to move my project forward, my brain goes into overdrive and overheats before the fucking race begins. Here, if I have to go outside for some reason, let's say it's minus 20 Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but the first few seconds outside feel actually nice. It's super cold, but refreshing in a way. But then the body starts to really feel the weather, you know? The longer you stay outside, the colder you get. The tips of the fingers begin to feel a bit frozen. They get all red and stiff. The face gets red too. Maybe the eyes stir up a bit. Breathing gets a bit harder. I am clearly not Canadian. I think creativity works the same way when we start to freeze up. It's not sudden. There are signs if we look closely. One of the signs for me is when I start adding way too many things to my to-do list. So many things that there's no way I'm gonna get to all of them, and I'll let myself down for sure. And I constantly underestimate how long it will take me to do things, and my brain keeps telling me, no, you can do this, you can do that, you can do that, and that, and that. And it just doesn't stop. Another sign that overthinking is taking over my creative exploration is when I start avoiding the work altogether. All those things I put on the list. In researching this kind of thing, I came across a term called analysis paralysis. I had heard about it before in marketing, but this has come up in old philosophy, in fables, Shakespeare, Voltaire, and really most places. I guess you could find some reference to it. In marketing, part of it is just how online companies try to create fewer options for the customers to choose with ease, or how instead of 15 color options, they only offered 3. it's easier to choose between three without getting people to overanalyze things. Because that's what this is. It refers to overthinking or overanalyzing things to the point where you can no longer take any action or make any decision. The fear of making a decision or overlooking something better takes over, and the person is paralyzed, unable to act. So we think about this creative thing we want to do, and suddenly our brain starts to analyze it and overanalyze it, consider possible scenarios and actions and all of that. And different things you could do, different ways you could take, and it just doesn't stop. We research things, we research so many things. We learn how to publish and market a novel that is not yet written. Then we take no action at all. Well, first, I think because of all that quote-unquote thinking already feels like work, we kind of feel a bit better about ourselves, and we feel like we did something towards the thing we wanted to do, even though we haven't taken any actions. We kind of feel like there was progress. But then we cannot actually take a step forward because now we have way too many options. In the previous episode, I started talking a bit about resistance, which is this invisible force that keeps us from tackling anything remotely creative. The fears we have, the self-doubt, the belief that we are not good enough are all weapons of the resistance. You know, when we sit down to finally write that thing we meant to write, but then we remember that we have a sink full of dishes. And how can we ever write with a sink full of dirty dishes? Impossible. So we go wash the dishes instead. Point to resistance. Overthinking is one of the resistance's greatest allies in my life, and from what I can tell, in many creative people's lives. In particular, people who say they aren't creative, but deep down always wanted to write that one thing or draw or paint. I guess in my mind, I associate this feeling of being completely frozen with the weather outside. And perhaps the fact that I haven't left my house in over 10 months makes everything feel a bit heavier and starker. The cold creeps in, the overthinking begins, and I stand still. I was gonna leave the next poem to the end of the episode, but maybe I'll read it now. Because it's a bit darker, but it does speak to that feeling of being completely frozen, you know, and feeling like you're staring death in the face. Let's go to that poem. Freezing. She was cold, I thought. To be fair, it was freezing, but her body temperature was fine. Not like the weather outside, -Celsius, low Fahrenheit. Her stare, like an ice spike, colder than measures, pierced through my soul. I shivered and questioned all the choices I've ever made. This was the end, I thought. She was cold, and I was frozen. My hands couldn't move. My mind went in overdrive and blank. My tears crystallized. No blanket could bring me back to life. The thing about resistance is that it's subtle, and we end up feeling bad about ourselves for not starting that project, trying that painting class, or whatever it is that we wanted to do. The thought that used to cross my mind was, well, everyone else does it. They are out there creating stuff with ease, so maybe I'm just not good enough. Maybe this is not for me. Actually, it's a good thing that I didn't start anything or didn't finish that thing. It would be an embarrassment. And guess what? That's just resistance taking over. I've battled resistance before and I have won a couple of times. But I thought once I beat it, it would be gone forever. And that was a huge mistake. It came back. It always comes back. And I let my guard down, and soon enough, there I was, completely frozen, sitting on the couch, unable to create anything at all, while my brain worked 1,000,000 miles an hour. Some people have been living in the cold for years with no sign of spring anywhere near them. Others, like me, managed to find faint rays of sunshine here and there. And there's the other group experiencing all the seasons. Do you struggle with this analysis paralysis thing too? At the moment, how I'm trying to deal with this creative frostbite, I'ma call it, is like this. As I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to identify the signs when the cold resistance starts to creep in. If I manage to catch it early, I might be able to avoid it. The other thing is I'm trying to give myself less aggressive goals, so to speak. Achievable goals, and I'm planning on including a couple of very easy goals just to see how it feels. I think that will help me close one of the doors of my overthinking traps. Because my mind is always trying to get me to do more, And that's a huge trap that I've always fallen into. Another thing to do is to break things down into smaller tasks, sometimes tiny tasks. That might help us get started, because getting started is probably one of the hardest parts when it comes to fighting resistance. Maybe your goal for day 1 of your novel is just to sit in front of the computer for a while without reaching for any distractions. Write whatever comes to mind. If nothing comes to mind, maybe just write a list of horrible ideas you would never write about. What are the worst ideas you can come up with? What I'm trying to do to avoid freezing in the future is to always take one action forward, however small it is. But it has to be real action. Sometimes we trick ourselves by saying we need to think about it instead of doing it, or we need to research it. Those are traps. I mean, sure, you need to research things for some creative projects, but not at first. If you want to write something, just try and write it first. It doesn't have to be scientifically accurate. Then, once you have something written, you can go and research to see if that needs some editing, Maybe the one action is to come up with your subject, write one sentence, whatever small thing you can do. What if you take one action toward the creative thing you want to do as soon as you finish this episode? Or right now, one action. And if you want to tell someone about it and you don't feel comfortable discussing with your friends, because sometimes we feel silly when we focus on our creative goals, maybe hit me up on Instagram at memento.mori.lab. I will be super proud of you, Let's go. We are stronger than resistance. Oh, and by the way, I highly suggest reading The War of Art by Steven Pressfield and The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. These are the 2 books that have been helping me a lot in this creative journey in trying to explore things and putting things out there. So maybe it might help you too. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, maybe share it with someone who might like it too. I will be forever grateful, and it will mean the world to me. I hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks for hanging around till the end. See ya!